The first thing you register is the cold. Not the crisp, dry cold of a modern, centrally heated bedroom where a window has been left ajar, but a deep, damp, penetrating cold that seems to be radiating from the very ground beneath you. It's a cold that has settled into your bones. The second thing is the smell. It's a complex, layered aroma, thick and unfamiliar. There is the sharp, resinous scent of pine smoke, the earthy, almost sweet smell of damp soil and turf, the unmistakable musk of unwashed bodies and animal hides, and a faint, underlying tang of brine and old fish. It's the smell of a world without plastic, without disinfectant, without air fresheners. It's the smell of survival. You try to open your eyes, but the lids are heavy, glued shut with sleep. A sound, low and rhythmic, has been weaving itself into the fabric of your consciousness. It's a chorus of heavy breathing, punctuated by the occasional cough or a soft, guttural snore. You are not alone. Finally, your eyes peel open. The world is a study in shades of gray and brown, illuminated by a single, weak source of light. You are lying on your side, on a raised wooden platform covered with a layer of straw and a coarse, scratchy blanket that feels like felted wool. Above you, massive, smoke-blackened timbers curve towards a central ridgepole, disappearing into the gloom. There are no windows. The only light trickles down from a rectangular hole in the roof, directly above a pit in the center of the long, cavernous room. In this pit, the embers of a fire glow a sullen orange, casting long, dancing shadows that make the space feel alive and menacing. This is the source of the smoke, and you realize with a jolt that there is no chimney. The smoke simply finds its own way out, staining everything it touches with a greasy, dark patina. You are inside a building, but it feels more like a cave, a burrow dug into the earth and roofed with timber and turf. You are in a longhouse. You slowly, carefully push yourself up onto an elbow. The movement sends a protest through your stiff muscles. The air is thin and hazy. All around you, on similar platforms running the length of the walls, are sleeping forms, mounds of dark wool and fur, rising and falling in unison. In the dim light, you can make out the shapes of people. Men, women, children, all sleeping together in this communal space. A man near you has a thick, braided beard that rests on his chest. A woman's blonde hair, long and plaited, has escaped her coverings and pools on the wood beside her head. They are not the grimy, savage brutes of caricature. Their hair, though styled in ways you've only seen in museums, appears clean. Their visible skin, though weathered, is not caked in filth. The myth of the perpetually dirty Viking is, like so many things you thought you knew, a convenient fiction. Personal grooming was a point of pride. Combs, tweezers, and even ear spoons are some of the most common finds in Viking Age graves. These people are clean. They just smell of smoke because they live in it. A wave of vertigo washes over you. This isn't a dream. The cold is too real, the smell too potent, the scratch of the wool against your skin too insistent. This is happening. But how? There's no memory of a transition, no flash of light, no convenient plot device. One moment your life, the next this, you look down at yourself, a fresh spike of panic lancing through you. You are not wearing your own clothes. You are dressed in a simple, undyed woolen tunic, belted at the waist with a leather cord. Beneath it, you can feel loose-fitting trousers of a similar material. On your feet are soft leather shoes, little more than shaped hide stitched together with sinew. The clothes are rough, functional, and utterly alien. Someone has undressed you and redressed you. The thought is deeply unsettling. Who are they? And more importantly, what do they think you are? You have a choice. Lie back down, pull the blanket over your head, and pretend this is a nightmare from which you will eventually wake. Or you can face this new reality. The instinct for self-preservation, that primal, deep-seated command, wins out. You need information. You need to understand the rules of this place before you break one. And in a world that looks this hard, breaking a rule probably has consequences far more severe than a stern talking to. You swing your legs over the side of the platform, your soft shoes making no sound on the hard-packed earthen floor. You stand up, your head swimming for a moment in the smoky air. The scale of the longhouse is immense. It must be 60, maybe 70 feet long. The central aisle is wide enough for several people to walk abreast. The fire pit is the heart of the home, the source of light, heat, and cooked food. Along the walls, beneath the sleeping platforms, you can see wooden chests, looms, and various tools you can't identify. This is not just a bedroom. It is a living room, a dining room, and a workshop, all under one long, curved roof. A child coughs in their sleep, a small, wet sound that echoes in the quiet hall. You freeze, every muscle tensed. No one stirs. You are a ghost in their midst, a specter from another time. Your most immediate pressing problem is language. You don't speak a word of Old Norse. You might know Ragnarök or Valhalla from popular culture, but you can't ask, "Where am I?" or "Please don't kill me." Your silence is your only shield, but it also makes you a mystery. And mysteries in small, tight-knit communities can be dangerous. You are an unknown quantity, a blank slate onto which they will project their own fears and assumptions. Are you a shipwreck survivor, a captive from a raid, an escaped thrall, or something worse, a ghost, a draugr, a creature of ill omen? Your behavior in these first few hours will likely determine which story they choose to believe. The sky visible through the smoke hole is beginning to lighten, shifting from inky black to a deep, bruised purple. The village will wake soon. You need to be doing something, or at least appear to be. Idleness is a luxury, and you are in no position to afford it. You spot a collection of wooden buckets near the entrance, a heavy-looking yoke resting beside them, carrying water. It's a universal task, simple, unambiguous. It requires no language, only a strong back. It's the perfect camouflage for a man or woman out of time. You walk towards the entrance, your steps slow and deliberate. The door is not a hinged rectangle of wood as you'd expect. It's a heavy, hide-covered panel that slides sideways into a recess in the wall. You pull it. It's heavier than it looks, and it scrapes along its track with a groan of wood on wood. The cold that hits you is a physical blow. It's sharp and clean, scouring the smoke from your lungs. You step outside and the world expands into a panorama of breathtaking, brutal beauty. The longhouse is one of several buildings clustered on a patch of land overlooking a fjord. The water is a sheet of dark, cold steel, its surface ruffled by the wind. Steep, tree-covered mountains rise almost vertically from the opposite shore, their peaks lost in a shroud of low-hanging mist. The village itself is not the fortified, palisaded stronghold you might imagine. It's an open settlement, a working farmstead or byre. There are a handful of other longhouses, though none as large as the one you just left. Dotted between them are smaller, sunken-featured buildings, little more than pits dug into the ground with a turf roof. These are the workshops, the Grubenhäuser, where weaving, metalworking, or other crafts might take place. The air is filled with the sounds of the waking world, the bleating of sheep from a nearby enclosure, the grunt of a pig, the distant, lonely cry of a seabird. There's a well-worn path leading down towards the water. This must be the source. You pick up the yoke, settling its unfamiliar weight across your shoulders, and hook two of the wooden buckets onto it. They are surprisingly heavy, made of thick staves bound with hazel withies. You start down the path, your soft shoes slipping on the damp earth and loose stones. The path is slick with something else, too. The morning dew, yes, but also the accumulated filth of the settlement. There are no sewers here, no sanitation department. Waste, both human and animal, is simply part of the landscape. You might be tempted to think of this as a primitive lack of sanitation. It is, but it is also a highly efficient, community-oriented system of returning nutrients to the soil. The midden heap, a steaming pile of household waste, animal dung, and ashes from the fire, is not just a garbage dump. It's a compost pile, the future fertility of the fields. Try to remember that as you try not to step in it. You reach the edge of the fjord. A small, fast-running stream cuts across the shoreline, tumbling down from the hills and spilling into the salt water. This is the freshwater source. The water is so clear it's invisible, running over a bed of smooth, gray stones. You unhook the buckets and dip them in. The cold is shocking, numbing your fingers instantly. You fill them, the weight making you stagger as you lift them. You settle the yoke back on your shoulders, the bucket swinging wildly for a moment before you find your balance. The journey back up the hill is a lesson in humility. The weight is immense, digging the wooden yoke into the muscles of your neck and shoulders. Your legs burn with the effort of the incline. This is not a task for the uninitiated. This is a daily, grinding reality for the people here. By the time you reach the longhouse, you are breathing heavily, sweat cooling on your skin despite the cold. People are beginning to stir. A man emerges from the longhouse, stretching and yawning. He is tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered face and a magnificent light brown beard. He sees you, and his eyes, a startlingly pale blue, narrow. He looks at you, then at the buckets, then back at you. There is no flicker of recognition, only a cool, appraising stare. You stand frozen, your heart hammering against your ribs. This is the first test. He is assessing you. Your clothes mark you as one of them, but your face is unknown. Your actions, however, are familiar. You have brought water. You have performed a useful, if menial, chore. You have not stood around looking lost. You have contributed. He gives a slow, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of acknowledgement, not of welcome. Then he turns and walks away, towards one of the smaller outbuildings, his stride long and confident. You have passed for now. You carry the water inside. The longhouse is transformed. The fire has been built up, and a large iron cauldron now hangs over it from a chain. A woman is stirring its contents with a long wooden paddle. The air is thick with the smell of boiling grain and perhaps cabbage. This is breakfast. Other people are moving about now, their voices a low murmur of a language you don't understand. It's a harsh, guttural tongue, full of hard consonants and rolling R's. It sounds less like the romanticized Norse of television, and more like a blend of modern Icelandic and German, spoken with a Scandinavian cadence. You pour the water into a larger barrel just inside the door, your muscles screaming in relief as you set the yoke down. No one pays you much mind. You are, for the moment, part of the scenery. A woman, the same one who was stirring the pot, ladles the contents into a series of simple wooden bowls. It's a thick, grayish porridge, or grurt. She hands a bowl to the man with the pale blue eyes who has returned and taken a seat on a bench near the fire. He is clearly the master of this house, the chieftain, the jarl, or perhaps a wealthy carl. He eats first, then his family, then the other freemen of the household. Finally, the woman gestures towards you and a few other individuals who have been lingering near the door. The thralls, the slaves, you are being classified. You take the bowl she offers. It's warm in your cold hands. There are no spoons for the likes of you. You find a quiet spot on the edge of a bench and use your fingers like the others. The porridge is bland and gritty, but it's hot and it fills your empty stomach. You eat slowly, watching, always watching. The social order of the hall is laid bare in this simple meal. Proximity to the chieftain's high seat in the middle of the long wall bench is everything. His family and most trusted warriors sit beside him. Further down, the freemen, the farmers and craftsmen who owe him allegiance. And at the very ends, near the doors where the cold drafts blow, are the thralls. People who are not people. They are property chattels. They can be bought, sold, or killed at their master's whim. They have no legal standing, no honor to defend. You are sitting among them, and you realize with a sickening lurch that this is your station. Unknown, unskilled, and unable to communicate, you are by default at the very bottom of this rigid, unforgiving hierarchy. Your modern skills, your education, your ability to code or write or argue a point of law are useless here. Can you build a boat? Can you forge a sword? Can you weave wool into cloth? Can you till a field with an ard plow? Can you fight with an axe and a shield? If the answer is no, then you are worth less than a good milk cow. After the meal, the day's work begins in earnest. The longhouse empties out as people head to their appointed tasks. The chieftain confers with a group of men, their conversation serious, their gestures pointing towards the fjord. The women gather around the looms, their hands a blur of motion as they work the warp and weft. The rhythmic clacking of the loom waits a constant, percussive beat in the background. A young boy is sent to the sheep pen, his dog yapping at his heels. Someone needs to muck out the byre where the cattle were kept overnight. A grizzled, one-eyed man, who seems to be in charge of the thralls, points a blunt finger at you, then at a wooden shovel and a wheelbarrow. The message is clear. Your job for the day is to move manure. You spend the next several hours in the cold, damp air, shoveling animal waste into a rickety, solid-wheeled barrow and trundling it to the midden heap. The work is back-breaking, mindless, and foul-smelling. but it gives you time to think, to observe. You learn the layout of the farmstead. The longhouse is the heart. The byre, attached to one end of the longhouse, provides not only shelter for the precious cattle, but also a source of heat for the human inhabitants. The sunken huts are for specialized crafts. You hear the clang of a hammer on metal from one, the smithy. From another, you see shavings of wood piling up outside the door, the carpenter's workshop. The fields enclosed by low stone walls are being prepared for planting. A man guides a simple plow, an ard, pulled by a pair of oxen. It doesn't turn the soil like a modern plow, it just scratches a furrow in the earth. It's inefficient, but it's what they have. Everything here is a product of this place. The houses are built of timber from the surrounding forest and turf from the ground. The clothes are made from the wool of their own sheep, the leather from their own cattle. The tools are forged from bog iron, smelted with charcoal made from their own trees. This is a closed system, a self-sufficient world, but it's not an isolated one. The fjord is not a barrier, it is a highway. It connects them to the wider world, to trade, to raid, to other chieftains, and to the king. That longship, pulled up on the shore and covered with a canvas tarp, is the key to their prosperity and their power. It is their weapon and their delivery truck, their pride and their most valuable possession. As you work, you become acutely aware of the unwritten rules that govern every interaction. The way a lower status person will not meet the eyes of a superior. The subtle deference shown to the chieftain's wife, the husfrija, who holds the keys to the storerooms at her belt and directs the internal economy of the farm with an iron will. Her power is immense. While the chieftain deals with politics, law, and warfare, the world outside the farm, she is the absolute master of everything within it. She manages the food supplies, the textiles, the servants. A Viking man might be master of his ship, but at home he was a guest in his wife's hall. Women in this society had rights that would be lost for 1,000 years after the end of the Viking Age. They could inherit property, run a business, request a divorce, and claim their dowry back if the marriage ended. They were not equal, but they were not powerless. You also begin to notice the importance of honor, or hither. It is the central currency of this society. A man's worth is measured by his reputation, his fame, the deeds of his ancestors, and his willingness to avenge any slight, no matter how small. An ill-chosen word, a boast that can't be backed up, an accusation of cowardice. These are not trivial matters. They are attacks on a man's very identity, and they must be answered, often with violence. The legal system, the thing, is designed not so much to determine guilt or innocence in an abstract sense, but to mediate these disputes and prevent them from escalating into blood feuds that could tear the community apart. It's a system of negotiated settlements, of oaths and witnesses and compensation, or wurgeld. But for it to work, you have to have a place in the society. You have to have a family to back your claims and pay your fines. You, a nameless, silent stranger, have none of these things. You have no honor to defend because you have no name to attach it to. In a way, this makes you safe. No one will challenge you to a duel, a holmgang, because there is no honor to be gained from killing a nobody. But it also makes your life worthless. If the one-eyed thrall master were to strike you dead for being too slow with the wheelbarrow, it's unlikely anyone would object. Days bleed into one another, each defined by the same routine. Wake in the cold, eat the gray porridge, work until your body aches, eat a midday meal of bread, cheese, and dried fish, work again until dusk, then gather in the longhouse for the main evening meal. This is the social highlight of the day. The fire is blazing, the hall is filled with people. The food is better, stewed meat, perhaps, or fresh fish with root vegetables. And there is ale, a weak, smoky-tasting ale, but it flows freely. The mood in the hall becomes boisterous. Men boast of their strength, their wealth, their prowess. They tell stories, sagas, long, epic poems of gods, heroes, and battles. A man with a harp, a skald, might be called upon to recite verses in praise of the chieftain, immortalizing his deeds in song and securing his reputation. This is how history is recorded, how honor is built and maintained. You sit in the shadows, listening to the alien cadences, trying to pick out words. You start to learn. Mather is man, Kona is woman, Hus is house, Dreka is drink, broth is bread, simple, concrete nouns. You learn them through repetition, through context. You learn the names of the people. The chieftain is Einar. His wife is Sigrid. The one-eyed thrall master is Kormakr. You learn to respond to a grunt and a pointed finger. Your world is one of simple commands and physical labor. You are becoming a part of the machine, a cog. You are no longer a mystery. You are just the strange, silent thrall who appeared from nowhere. You are useful, and therefore, you are allowed to exist. One evening, something different happens. The mood in the hall is tense. Einar, the chieftain, is not his usual boisterous self. He is quiet, his brow furrowed. He speaks in low tones to his most trusted men. Sigrid watches him, her face a mask of concern. The talk continues late into the night, long after the ale has run out. You don't understand the words, but you understand the tone. It's the sound of worry, of planning, of danger. The next morning, the reason becomes clear. A lookout posted on the hill overlooking the fjord lets out a long, piercing cry. A horn blast answers from the village. Instantly, the routine is shattered. Men grab for weapons that are always kept close at hand. Axes, spears, round shields hanging from the walls of the longhouse. There is no panic, only a grim, focused urgency. Einar strides out of the hall, a mail shirt now covering his tunic, a helmet on his head. It's a simple, conical helmet with a nasal guard, not the horned monstrosity of fantasy. Horns on a helmet are a good way to get it caught on a weapon and have your head wrenched sideways. These people are practical. You follow the crowd, keeping to the edges, your heart pounding. Everyone is looking out at the fjord, and you see it, a ship, a longship, its menacing, dragon-headed prow cutting through the cold water. It is not their own ship. This one is unfamiliar, its sail a different color. It is approaching the settlement. Is this an attack, a raid by a rival chieftain? The men of the village form a shield wall on the shore, a bristling line of wood and steel. They are outnumbered, but they are on their home ground defending their families. They will not break easily. You watch from a distance, hidden behind one of the outbuildings, your mind racing. This is it, the reality of the word Viking. It is not just a name for a people. It is a job description. And sometimes you are the one doing the Viking, and sometimes it is being done to you. The ship does not beach itself aggressively. It slows, and a man at the stern calls out across the water. His voice is loud and clear, carrying in the still air. Einar calls back. A negotiation is taking place. The tension on the shore lessens slightly, but the shields remain locked. After a long exchange, the visiting ship drops its anchor a short distance from the shore. A small boat is lowered, and a handful of men row to the beach. Their leader is a huge man, even by the standards of this place, with a fiery red beard and a cloak of wolf fur. He carries no weapon in his hands, a sign of peaceful intent, but a massive axe is tucked into his belt. He and Einar meet between the ship and the shield wall. They talk for a long time. The red-bearded man is a trader, it seems, or perhaps a chieftain from a nearby fjord on his way to the Thing. He is seeking hospitality for the night. Hospitality is a sacred duty. To refuse a traveler shelter is a grave insult and a mark of a poor chieftain. But to welcome a potential rival with a ship full of armed men is a risk. Einar makes his decision. He lowers his spear and gestures towards the longhouse. The red-bearded chieftain, whose name you later learn is Harold, smiles a thin, humorless smile. His men are to remain on the ship, but he and his two closest retainers will accept Einar's hospitality. That night, the longhouse is more crowded than ever. The guests are given the seats of honor next to Einar. The finest food is brought out, the strongest ale. The skald sings his most flattering verses. It is a performance of power and prosperity. Einar is showing his guests that he is a man of substance, not to be trifled with. Harold, for his part, is a gracious guest, full of praise for the food, the ale, and the beauty of Sigrid. But his eyes are constantly moving, assessing the wealth of the hall, the quality of the weapons on the wall, the strength of Einar's men. It is a delicate, dangerous dance of diplomacy and veiled threats. You watch from your usual place in the shadows, a silent observer to this high-stakes theater. You are invisible to these powerful men. You are part of the furniture, and this invisibility gives you a unique perspective. You notice things. You notice that one of Harald's men, a scarred warrior named Bjorn, never smiles. His eyes are cold and flat, and he watches Einar's people with a predator's gaze. You notice the way Harald's hand rests on the hilt of his dagger, even as he laughs at one of Einar's jokes. You notice the subtle shift in the allegiance of one of Einar's own men, a young, ambitious warrior named Olaf, who seems a little too impressed by Harald's boasts of wealth and adventure. You see the cracks in the facade, the fault lines of ambition and greed that run beneath the surface of this society. The next day, Harald and his men depart, with many thanks and promises of future friendship. As their longship disappears down the fjord, a collective sigh of relief seems to run through the settlement. The crisis has been averted, but a seed has been planted, and the relative poverty of their own existence had settled into the minds of the younger men. The days that followed were filled with a restless energy. The work of the farm continued, of course. The rhythms of agriculture and animal husbandry are indifferent to human ambition. The sheep still needed to be moved to higher summer pastures, the small fields of barley and oats needed weeding, and the sea still offered up its bounty of fish to those patient enough to seek it. But the talk in the evenings changed. The old sagas of gods and giants were still told, but now they were interspersed with more recent tales, stories of daring voyages to the west, of towns rich with silver, of monasteries unguarded and ripe for the plucking. The young warrior Olaf was often the center of these discussions. He was a classic example of a man whose ambition had outgrown his station. He was not of Einar's direct kin, but a freeman sworn to the household, strong and skilled with an axe, but possessing little wealth of his own beyond his weapons and a fierce sense of pride. For men like Olaf, the world offered two paths to status and riches: loyal service to a generous chieftain, hoping for reward, or striking out on one's own, risking everything for a chance at glory. Harald's visit had shown him a third, more tempting path, following a chieftain who was not afraid to take what he wanted. His talk was clever. He never criticized Einar directly. That would be a challenge, a dangerous breach of etiquette. Instead, he spoke in generalities. He would praise the courage of the old heroes, then sigh and wonder aloud if men were still made of such stern stuff. He would describe a beautiful sword or a fine piece of jewelry, then remark on how such things could only be won, not made or farmed. His words were sparks falling on dry tinder. You saw the effect on the other young men. Their laughter became louder, their chests seemed to puff out a little further. They practiced more with their weapons, their mock battles in the evenings taking on a harder, more competitive edge. The sound of a whetstone scraping against an axe blade became a common evening chorus. Einar was no fool, he saw it all. He was a man in his 40s, his power resting not on youthful fire but on a foundation of proven success, good judgment, and the loyalty he had carefully cultivated over many years. He had led raids in his youth, and his farmstead was prosperous enough to prove it. But he also had a wife, children, and a community that depended on his wisdom, not his recklessness. A failed raid could mean the loss of his best men, his ship, his honor, and could leave his entire settlement vulnerable. He was playing a longer game. One evening, as Olaf was holding forth to a captive audience of young warriors about the legendary wealth of an English king, Einar acted. He didn't shout or make a grand speech. He simply rose from his high seat, picked up a throwing axe from the wall, and walked to the door of the longhouse. He gestured for Olaf to follow. A hush fell over the hall. This was not a formal challenge, but it was a demonstration. Outside in the long, ethereal twilight of the northern summer, Einar paced off 30 steps from a large birch tree. He turned, said nothing, and with a fluid motion that spoke of 1,000 repetitions, he hurled the axe. It flew through the air, a dark blur, and embedded itself with a solid thunk deep into the trunk of the tree dead center. He turned to Olaf, his pale blue eyes unreadable, and simply gestured towards the tree, an invitation. Olaf, his face flushed, swaggered to the throwing spot. He took his own axe, hefted it, and threw. He was strong, and the axe flew true, but it struck the tree a hand's breadth to the left of Einar S. A murmur went through the crowd that had gathered. Einar walked calmly to the tree, retrieved both axes, and handed Olaf's back to him. He then paced off another 10 steps, a distance that seemed impossibly far. He turned, and without a moment's hesitation, threw again. The axe spun, seeming to hang in the air forever, before sinking into the wood just below his first throw. He did not look at Olaf. He simply walked back into the longhouse and resumed his seat. The message was clear and delivered without a single word of rebuke. You talk of glory, but I possess skill. You dream of deeds, but I have a lifetime of them behind me. I am the chieftain here. The talk of raids quieted down for a while after that. The season turned. The sun, which had been a fleeting visitor, now lingered in the sky for 20 hours a day, refusing to fully set, painting the world in a perpetual state of dawn and dusk. This was the season of action, the time when the fjord, that great liquid road, called to them. The longship, which had been resting under its canvas shelter all winter, became the focus of the settlement's energy. It was a thing of beauty and terror, a masterpiece of naval engineering. You were put to work on it, along with the other thralls. Your job was to help apply a new coat of tar to the hull. It was hot, sticky, miserable work. You would heat the black, viscous pine tar in a cauldron over a fire until it was bubbling, then slop it onto the overlapping planks of the hull with a rag tied to a stick. The fumes were acrid and intoxicating, and the tar got everywhere, staining your hands and clothes a stubborn black. But the work gave you an intimate appreciation for the vessel. You saw how the long, flexible oak planks, the strakes, were riveted together with iron, a technique called clinker building. This gave the hull a strength and flexibility that allowed it to ride the waves rather than fight them. You saw the intricate carvings of intertwining beasts that decorated the prow and stern post, not just decoration, but a manifestation of the ship's spirit, its power. You ran your hands over the smooth, worn wood of the gunwale, where the shields would hang during a voyage, and you looked up at the massive step where the single, great mast would be raised. This ship was not a mere boat. It was the heart of their identity. It was what made them Vikings. It allowed them to trade, to explore, to connect, and to project their power across the sea. Without it, they were just farmers, locked in their isolated valley. With it, they were masters of the known world. The debate about the ship's purpose for the summer was renewed, this time more formally. One evening, Einar called all the freemen of the household, the carler, to gather in the center of the hall. The thralls and women were expected to keep to the periphery, to be unseen and unheard, but you could still listen. This was a husting, a household assembly. Einar, as chieftain, had the final say, but he would be a fool to ignore the will of the men whose loyalty and strength he depended on. He laid out the situation. The winter stores were adequate, but not abundant. The grain harvest from the previous year had been merely average. Their stock of trade goods, furs from winter trapping, blocks of soapstone from a local quarry, and a few fine whetstones, was good. Their relations with the neighboring chieftain to the north were stable, but the chieftain to the south was known to be ambitious and untrustworthy. Olaf spoke first, his voice filled with a passion that was hard to deny. He argued for a raid, a quick, bold strike to the west towards the English kingdoms. He spoke of Harold's success, of the silver that was flooding into the Norse lands from that direction. He argued that a successful raid would solve all their problems. It would bring wealth to every man who sailed, enhance Einar's reputation, and warn off their troublesome southern neighbor. Honor and silver are not found in our fields, he concluded, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword. They are found over the waves. An older man, a farmer named Thorbjorn with hands like gnarled oak roots, spoke next. His voice was slow and deliberate. He spoke of the risks. The sea was hungry, and the men of the West were not all soft priests. They had their own warriors, their own kings. He reminded them of a raid 10 years prior, led by a chieftain from a nearby fjord that had returned with half its men in a broken ship, having found nothing but strong resistance. Silver is good, he said, looking at Einar, but strong sons to work the fields and strong neighbors to stand with you at the thing are better. Let us take our goods to the market at Koppang. Trade is a sure thing. A raid is a gamble with the Norns. The debate went back and forth. a microcosm of the two forces that drove this society, the farmer's caution and the warrior's ambition. They were two sides of the same coin. The wealth from raiding built the farms, and the stability of the farms allowed for the risk of raiding. Einar listened to it all, his face impassive. When everyone who wished to speak had spoken, he stood. Olaf speaks with the fire of youth, he began, giving the young warrior a nod of respect. And Thorbjorn speaks with the wisdom of many winters. Both speak truth. He paused, letting the silence hang in the smoky air. This year we will do both. We will load the ship with our trade goods. We will sail first not to the west, but south to the Gjulading, the great assembly. I have business there concerning our land boundaries with Jarl Halfdan. We must show our strength and our right at the thing. All freemen will attend. From there, he continued, his eyes sweeping over the faces of the young men, we will see where the winds and the fates take us. A wise man prepares for trade, but is always ready for a fight. It was a masterful compromise. It satisfied the older, more cautious men by prioritizing law and trade, and it left the door open for the raiding that the younger men craved. It reasserted his authority and his wisdom as a leader who could balance competing interests. A cheer went up in the hall. The decision was made. The next week was a blur of preparation. The ship, now freshly tarred and gleaming, was loaded. Bales of fox and marten fur, carefully wrapped in hide. Heavy blocks of gray-green soapstone, which could be carved into bowls, lamps, and cooking pots. Barrels of whetstones, a vital export. Along with the trade goods came the tools of the other trade. Casks of water, sacks of hard, dry bread that would last for weeks, barrels of salted fish and dried meat. And the weapons. Every man polished his shield, sharpened his axe and spear, and checked the stitching on his leather gear. The mood was electric, a mix of excitement and solemnity. For you, this was a time of great uncertainty. What would happen to you? Thralls were sometimes taken on voyages to do the rowing and the heavy work, but they were also mouths to feed, a liability. You were strong from months of hard labor, but you were still an unknown. One afternoon, as you were hauling a heavy sack of barley flour towards the ship, Sigrid, the chieftain's wife, stopped you. She was a formidable presence, her posture erect, the bronze keys to the household storehouse jangling at her belt, a symbol of her authority. She looked you over, her gaze sharp and intelligent. It was the first time anyone of high status had truly looked at you, not as a pair of hands, but as a person. She spoke a few words in Norse, then seeing your blank expression, she sighed and switched to gestures. She pointed at you, then at the ship. Then she made a rowing motion with her arms. You were going, you didn't know whether to feel terror or relief. To be left behind would mean safety, but it would also mean another season of mucking out the byre, a continuation of your non-existence. To go on the ship was to sail into the heart of the Viking world, a world of violence, uncertainty, and perhaps opportunity. It was a world where a man, even a thrall, might change his fate with a single act of courage or desperation. Your life, which had become a predictable routine of servitude, was about to be thrown into chaos once more. The day of departure arrived. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. The fjord was calm, its surface like dark glass. The entire settlement, even the smallest children, gathered on the shingle beach to see the men off. It was a solemn occasion. The women stood silently, their faces stoic, betraying little of the fear they must have felt. To see your husband, your son, your brother sail away was to know that you might never see them again. The sea, the sickness, the enemy, all could claim him. Sigrid stood beside Einar, handing him his helmet and his ancestral spear. They exchanged no tender kiss, no modern display of affection. Theirs was a partnership forged in a hard world. He simply placed his hand on her shoulder for a moment, a gesture of trust and farewell, and she gave a firm nod in return. He was entrusting his home, his lands, his entire legacy to her care. The men waded out into the frigid water, pushing the longship off its rollers and into the fjord. They clambered aboard, their movements economical and practiced. There were 30 of them, a full crew for a ship of this size. You were one of the last to board, scrambling over the gunwale and finding a space on a sea chest near the stern, trying to stay out of the way. You were not given an oar, not yet. Your job, for now, was to be ballast. The mast was raised. a huge undertaking that required the coordinated effort of a dozen men. The great square sail of striped red and white wool was unfurled, and it caught the gentle offshore breeze with a loud snap. The ship began to move, gliding silently away from the shore. The figures on the beach grew smaller, the sounds of the farmstead, the bleating sheep, the barking dog faded away. The longhouse, which had been your entire world, shrank until it was just another building in a cluster of buildings, nestled at the foot of the immense, silent mountains. The ship rounded a bend in the fjord, and the settlement was gone. You were alone with 30 armed Norsemen on a plank of wood, surrounded by the cold, deep water. Einar stood at the tiller, his hand resting lightly on the steering oar, his gaze fixed on the open water ahead. Olaf and the younger men were laughing, their spirits high, their minds already full of silver and glory. Thorbjorn and the older farmers sat quietly, their faces turned back towards the land they were leaving behind. And you sat on your chest, a ghost from another time, your heart a cold knot of fear and wonder, sailing towards an unknown fate. The wind was picking up, the sail billowed out, and the dragon prow began to rise and fall with the gentle swell of the sea, a beast awakening. The journey had begun. The world shrank to the length of the ship and the height of the sky. Life became a series of simple, brutal rhythms dictated by the wind and the sea. The sea chest you sat on was your bed, your chair, and your only piece of personal space. Privacy was a concept as alien here as a smartphone. You were packed in with the others, shoulder to shoulder, sharing body heat against the relentless, damp cold that seeped in from the sea spray. The groan of the timbers was a constant companion, a living sound that spoke of the immense pressures being exerted on the hull. The ship was alive, and its life was all that stood between you and the crushing, indifferent depths of the North Sea. Your days were spent in a state of watchful servitude. At first, you did nothing but try to stay out of the way, but idleness was not tolerated. Cormacher, the one-eyed thrall master, soon found tasks for you. Bailing. The ship, for all its masterful construction, was not perfectly watertight. Water constantly seeped through the planks, collecting in the bilge. Your job was to use a wooden bucket to scoop this foul, sloshing soup of seawater, rainwater, and general shipboard filth, and heave it over the side. It was endless, thankless work that left your back screaming and your hands raw. You learned to move with the pitch and roll of the vessel, to brace yourself against the mast, to anticipate the lurch of the next wave. You were learning the language of the sea, not with words, but with your body. When the wind died, the oars came out. They were monstrously long and heavy, and rowing was a torment. You were chained to the rhythm set by the older, more experienced men. The command was a low chant, a guttural count you didn't understand but learned to feel. Pull, release, pull, release. Your muscles, already hardened by farm work, were forged anew in the fire of this labor. You rowed until your vision blurred and your shoulders felt as though they were being torn from their sockets, but you did not stop. To stop was to show weakness, and weakness was an invitation to contempt or worse. During one grueling session under a hot, windless sky, you felt your strength failing. The oar grew impossibly heavy. Just as you were about to falter, the man next to you, the quiet farmer Thorbjorn, grunted a single word, draga, pull, and gave a mighty heave on his own oar, as if to lend you his strength. It was a small gesture, but it was the first time one of the freemen had acknowledged you as anything more than a tool. You found a new reserve of strength and pulled. Food was simple and monotonous. Hard, dry flatbread that scraped the roof of your mouth, strips of dried cod that were more salt than fish, and water from the casks that quickly took on a woody, stale taste. But no one complained. This was the price of travel. The men passed the long hours mending their gear, playing games of H-Nefatafel on carved wooden boards and telling stories. The tales were different now, more personal. They were stories of past voyages, of men they had known, of close calls and legendary halls of loot. You listened, absorbing the words, the names of places, Miklagard, the great city to the east, Dyflin, the Norse stronghold in Ireland, Jorvik, the capital of their kingdom in England. The world, which had been confined to a single fjord, was expanding in your mind, becoming a vast network of rivers and seas, all connected by ships like this one. After nearly a week at sea, a change came over the crew. They began to look eagerly towards the horizon. Then you saw it, a smudge of land, low and dark. As you drew closer, you saw that the coast was dotted with other ships, dozens of them, longships of all sizes and broader, deeper-hulled trading vessels called nars. You were approaching the mouth of a great fjord, and at its head lay the gullading, the assembly. The ship's sail was lowered, and the men took to the oars, rowing with a renewed vigor. The air, which had been clean and salty, now carried the smell of wood smoke, livestock, and thousands of people. The scene that greeted you was overwhelming. A temporary town had sprung up on a wide, flat plain by the water. Hundreds of tents and lean-tos made of hide and wool clustered together. The shore was a forest of masts. People were everywhere. Men in fine, brightly colored tunics and cloaks fastened with ornate silver brooches stood in groups, talking and gesturing. Women moved between the tents, tending to cooking fires. Merchants had set up booths, displaying their wares: pottery, glass beads, fine cloth, weapons, and amber from the Baltic. The air was a cacophony of sound, the lowing of cattle, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the shouts of traders, and a dozen different dialects of the Norse tongue. This was not a gathering of raiders. This was a society, a complex, organized political entity flexing its collective muscle. Einar guided the ship to an empty spot on the shore, and the men leaped out to secure it. He instructed most of the crew to remain with the ship and guard the cargo, but he pointed to you, to Thorbjorn, and to a few of his other senior men. You were to come with him. You walked through the throng, a silent shadow in Einar's wake. You were a nobody here, less than a nobody, but your proximity to a chieftain gave you a strange, borrowed immunity. No one challenged you, no one even looked at you. You were simply part of Einar's entourage. He led you to the heart of the gathering, to a large, open field dominated by a low hill. This was the Thingstead. Here the law was spoken and disputes were settled. On the hill, the most powerful chieftains, the Jarls, were seated on carved wooden chairs, surrounded by their best warriors. In the center stood a man holding a staff, the law speaker. His role was to recite the laws of the land from memory, a feat of prodigious mental endurance. Einar found his place among the other chieftains of his rank, and you stood behind him, a silent sentinel. The business of the day began. Disputes over inheritance, accusations of theft, arguments over marriage contracts. Each case was presented, witnesses were called, and oaths were sworn on a sacred arm ring consecrated to a god. It was a slow, deliberate process governed by ancient traditions. Then Einar's case was called. He stood and faced another chieftain, a powerfully built man with a smug, arrogant face. This was Jarl Halfdan, their southern neighbor. The dispute was over a piece of high pasture land that lay between their territories. Both claimed it. Halfdan spoke first, his voice dripping with condescension. He presented his claim, citing his family's long history in the region. He subtly belittled Einar, referring to his farmstead as a humble little portage, and questioning whether a man of Einar's modest means could truly have need of so much grazing land. It was a calculated insult, an attack on Einar's honor disguised as a legal argument. When it was Einar's turn, he did not respond with anger. He spoke calmly and clearly, laying out his own claim, supported by Thorbjorn and another old farmer who served as his witnesses. He spoke of his father and his father's father, who had used the land. He presented a notched stick, a tally of the years his family had paid a small tribute to the king for the right to use that land. The law speaker and the Jarls conferred. The judgment, when it came, was a compromise. The land was to be divided, a victory for neither, a loss for both. But Halfdan, not content with the legal outcome, had to have the last word. As he turned to leave, he looked at Einar and said, loud enough for all to hear, "Perhaps if you spent less time trading for pots and pans and more time winning silver like a real chieftain, you could afford to buy your own pastures." The air grew thick with tension. It was a direct, public challenge to Einar's honor, a questioning of his manhood and his worth as a leader. Olaf, who stood behind Einar, gripped the hilt of his axe, his face a mask of fury, but Einar remained perfectly still. He simply looked at Halfdan, a cold fire burning in his pale blue eyes, and said nothing. To respond with a public threat here at the sacred thing would be to break the law and the peace of the assembly, but his silence was louder than any shout. It was a promise. The debt of this insult would be paid, just not here, not now. They returned to the ship in silence. The mood had soured completely. The purpose of the voyage, the careful trade and diplomacy, had been overshadowed by a public humiliation. That evening, around a small fire on the beach, the dam of restraint broke. Olaf was incandescent with rage. He cannot be allowed to say such things. He called you a merchant, a peddler. Your honor and the honor of every man who follows you has been stained. He looked around at the faces of the other young men, who nodded in agreement. Harold would not have stood for it. He would have split Halfdan's skull where he stood. And he would have been declared an outlaw, his ship seized, and his men cut down for breaking the peace of the thing, Einar said, his voice dangerously quiet. There are right ways and wrong ways to answer an insult, Olaf. You have not yet learned the difference. So what is the right way? Olaf challenged. Do we sail home with our furs and our shame? Do we let the story of this day be told in every hall this winter? That Einar of the North Fjord is a man who swallows insults like a thrall. The word thrall hung in the air. Olaf glanced at you for a fraction of a second, a look of pure contempt. You, the living embodiment of powerlessness, were being used as a rhetorical weapon. Einar looked into the fire for a long time. The weight of his responsibilities seemed to press down on him. The need to maintain his authority, the demands of his ambitious young warriors, the sting of Halfdan's insult, the practical needs of his community, all swirled around him. When he finally looked up, his decision was made. "We will not sail home," he said, his voice hard as iron. "Thorbjorn, you will take the Nar, hire a crew of steady men from the market, take our goods to Koppang and get the best price you can. We will meet you back at the fjord before the first snows." He then turned to the rest of the men, his eyes locking with Olaf's. "The rest of us, we will take the longship. We will go and find enough silver that no man will ever again dare to question our worth." A wild, triumphant roar went up from the young warriors. They were going, "I acute Viking." They were going raiding. The next few days were a frenzy of activity. The trade goods were transferred to a hired Nar under Thorbjorn's command. The longship was stripped for war. Anything non-essential was removed. The ship was now lighter, faster, a pure predator. You remained with the longship. Your strong back was needed for the oars. You watched Thorbjorn and a handful of the older farmers depart on the slow, heavy trading ship, their faces grim. They were the farmers. You were now with the warriors. The two halves of their society had split, and you were on the side of fire and steel. They sailed west, out of the fjord, away from the coast of Norway, into the vast, empty expanse of the open sea. This was a different kind of sailing. There were no landmarks, only the sun by day and the stars by night. Einar navigated with an uncanny instinctual skill, reading the color of the water, the flight of birds, the direction of the swell. For days, you saw nothing but water and sky. The mood on the ship was tense and expectant. The men constantly sharpened their weapons, their talk a low hum of anticipation. Then one gray dawn, a lookout shouted, "Land!" A low, green coastline, hazy in the morning mist. England. A profound sense of dread settled in your stomach. This was no longer a story. This was real. The abstract concept of a raid was about to become a concrete, violent reality. They followed the coast for a day, staying far enough out to be a dark line on the horizon. Einar was looking for a specific target, one he knew from old stories or perhaps from a previous voyage. He found it, the mouth of a small river, winding inland through flat, marshy country, an isolated place, a vulnerable place. Under the cloak of the evening twilight, they rowed the ship up the river. The oars were muffled with rags. No one spoke. The only sounds were the dip of the blades in the water and the gentle current. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and vegetation. It smelled different from Norway, softer, richer. After an hour of silent rowing, they saw it. A cluster of stone buildings on a slight rise, surrounded by a low wall. A bell tower stood dark against the bruised purple sky. a monastery. A place of prayer, of learning, and of accumulated wealth. A perfect target. They beached the ship in a stand of reeds, the keel grating softly on the muddy bank. The men slipped over the side, their weapons in hand. They moved like shadows, their soft leather shoes making no sound on the damp grass. You were ordered to stay with the ship, along with 2 other thralls to guard it. Your heart hammered against your ribs. You crouched in the reeds, listening. For a long time, there was only the chirping of insects and the lapping of the river against the hull. Then the silence was shattered. A single terrified scream cut short, then more shouting in a language you vaguely recognized as a precursor to English. The splintering of a wooden door, the high, panicked ringing of a bell, silenced abruptly. Then came the fire, a flicker of orange against a stone wall, then another and another. Soon the main building was ablaze, flames licking up into the night sky, casting a hellish, dancing light over the scene. The sounds were a nightmare symphony, the roar of the fire, the crash of falling timbers, the screams of the dying, and the triumphant, savage shouts of the Norsemen. It was not a battle. It was a slaughter, a grim, methodical harvest of wealth and lives. The raid lasted less than an hour. The men began to return to the ship, their faces lit by the fire, their eyes wide with battle fever. They were carrying things: golden crosses, silver chalices, jeweled book covers, embroidered vestments. They dumped the loot onto the deck, a glittering pile of desecrated holiness. They herded a small group of captives, monks with their heads tonsured, their faces white with terror. They were valuable. They could be ransomed or sold as slaves. Olaf was in his element, his face smeared with soot, a bloody axe in his hand, laughing as he threw a heavy silver plate onto the pile. You were ordered to help carry the loot. You moved in a daze, your mind numb with horror. You picked up a heavy leather-bound book, its cover inlaid with gold and gems. The pages fell open, and you saw the beautiful, intricate calligraphy, the work of a lifetime of patient devotion. A man's life's work, now just another piece of plunder. As you carried it to the ship, you passed a small chapel, its door kicked in. From the darkness inside, you heard a sound. Not a scream, but a soft, terrified whimper. Something inside you, some long-dormant instinct from your own time, a flicker of a morality that had no place here, compelled you to look. You peered into the darkness. Cowering behind a stone altar was a young boy, no more than 15, dressed in the simple brown robe of a novice. His face was streaked with tears, his eyes wide with a terror so profound it had rendered him mute. He was clutching a small wooden crucifix to his chest. He looked at you, and in his eyes, you did not see an enemy. You saw a child about to be murdered. The men were still looting the main hall. No one was watching you. You had a choice. You could walk away, leave him to his fate. It was the sensible thing to do, the safe thing to do, or you could act. Your life as a thrall had been one of complete powerlessness. You were an object, a tool, but in that moment you had the power of life and death over this boy. You made a decision. It wasn't rational. It was purely human. You put a finger to your lips, a universal gesture of silence. You beckoned him to follow. Trembling, he crept out from behind the altar. You led him out the back of the chapel, away from the firelight, and into the deep shadows at the edge of the woods. You pointed into the darkness, a silent command to run, to disappear. Just as the boy melted into the trees, a figure stepped out from behind the chapel. It was Olaf. He had seen the whole thing. His eyes, glittering in the firelight, were filled with a mixture of confusion and contempt. "What are you doing, thrall?" he hissed in Norse. That was property, good for ransom. He took a step towards you, raising his bloody axe. "You steal from the chieftain, you steal from me." You stood your ground, your heart frozen. This was it. Your pointless, anachronistic act of compassion was going to get you killed. But before Olaf could take another step, another voice cut through the night, sharp and authoritative. Olaf, it was Einar. He had come to round up the last of his men. He walked towards you, his face grim, his eyes taking in the scene, you, the furious Olaf, the empty space where the captive boy had been. What is this? "The thrall," Olaf spat. "He let a captive go. I saw him. He helped him escape." Einar looked at you. His gaze was intense, searching. He was not just looking at a slave. He was trying to understand an inexplicable act. You had thrown away potential wealth for no reason he could comprehend. You had defied the entire logic of this world. He looked at Olaf's furious face, at the bloodlust still in his eyes. He looked at the burning monastery, at the pile of treasure on his ship. He had his silver. His honor was restored. But perhaps he saw in Olaf's unchecked aggression a danger, and in your strange, silent defiance, something else. "The raid is over," Einar said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "We have what we came for. Go back to the ship." Olaf hesitated, looking as if he might challenge the chieftain himself, but something in Einar's stare made him lower his axe. He shot you a look of pure hatred and stalked off towards the river. Einar stood before you for a long moment in the flickering, dying light of the fire. You were entirely at his mercy. He could kill you with a single blow and no one would question it. He looked at the woods where the boy had disappeared, then he looked back at you. He did not speak. He simply turned and walked back to the ship. It was not forgiveness. It was not understanding. It was a stay of execution. You had become something more than a thrall. You had become a puzzle, a problem he would solve later. You followed him back to the ship, your legs unsteady, the smell of smoke and death clinging to you like a shroud. The journey home was different. The men were richer, their sea chests heavy with silver and gold. But the easy camaraderie was gone, replaced by a sullen, watchful silence. Olaf and the younger warriors who followed him treated you with open hostility, their glares promising future retribution. But Einar's silent protection held them at bay. You were no longer invisible. You were a marked man, an anomaly. Einar would sometimes watch you, his expression unreadable, as if trying to decipher a rune he had never seen before. When you finally sailed back into your home fjord, the sight of the familiar mountains and the small settlement was profoundly jarring. It had been your prison, your place of servitude. Now, returning to it felt like a homecoming. Sigrid and the others were waiting on the shore. The wealth was brought out, displayed for all to see. The raid had been a spectacular success. Einar's honor was shining, brighter than ever. He was no longer a mere merchant. He was a victorious Viking chieftain. Olaf, for all his anger at you, was also rewarded, his share of the loot making him a wealthy man overnight. In the days that followed, your life changed. You were not freed, but you were no longer treated as just another thrall. Einar gave you new tasks. You worked with the carpenter, mending tools. You helped the smith at the forge. He was keeping you close under his direct observation. You were his strange property, the silent man who threw away silver. You still did not have a voice, but you now had a story. You had acted. You had made a choice in a world that had tried to strip you of all choice. One evening, you stood outside the longhouse, looking at the stars in the clear, cold sky. They were the same stars you had known your whole life, yet they looked completely different. They were not distant balls of gas. They were the lamps of the gods, the backdrop to the sagas. The world around you was no longer a terrifying, alien place. It was simply the world. The smell of wood smoke, the feel of the coarse wool tunic, the taste of the dark bread, these were the textures of your reality. The question that had haunted you since your arrival, "How do I get back?" had faded, replaced by a more immediate and profound one. "How do I survive tomorrow?" You were a man out of time, a ghost with a past no one could understand and a future that was terrifyingly uncertain. But you were alive. You had seen the worst of this world, its brutality and its greed, but you had also seen its strange beauty, its intricate social fabric, its unyielding sense of honor. You had made an enemy in Olaf, and you had earned the wary protection of a chieftain. You were no longer just a spectator. You were a player in the game, however minor your piece. The fear was still there, a cold stone in your gut, but it was now mingled with something else, a grim, hard-won resolve. You were no longer a visitor. You were a scar on the flesh of the past, and it, in turn, had become the fabric of your soul. The longhouse door was open, casting a warm, smoky light into the twilight. You walked inside.